Right, okay, now stand up. Yeah.
Can we do a head check? Do we have any veterinarians? That's us done. If you hear scientific things that aren't right, just don't chuck stuff at us, please. Just agree with us. Make us look okay. Typical fashion, my speech so far. He spent a lot of time telling me what to be in my books. He had his done it. No, I didn't finish mine. I've got next. What are you saying?
Over there somewhere.
Hey, listen, you always wear your glasses on the end of your nose from now on, please. Yeah, just
You didn't think. No, because when you have them up and you want to show disapproval, it gives you the option. So it's definitely a worthwhile thing to have in your back pockets. It's like there's a lecturer from UCL that's on the debate who has uncanny ability when he's giving a speech and he gets really, really serious. And he just looks down and he's like, okay, I'm arguing with him.
I'm just going to wear glasses for now.
Yeah. He's got bow tie and everything. And he uses a quill. No, it's Frank. Frank's a simple quill, isn't it? He sometimes can't his name down. Yeah, he's awesome. Wouldn't want to grab with a quill. I was just showing a rebuttal and I just shut up. You're from Ireland. What's that? What? Can you finish the speech? Can you tell something on which you cares about? Hannah, what are eagles kill? What are eagles kill? Bats. What's the primary prey of an eagle? What do eagles kill? The debate hasn't started yet.
Right, guys, on the right-hand side of the thing that's up, the smaller one, that is the output. So that is the one you need to be worried that you're standing in front of.
She's not.
Hopefully, Sarah should be out. Let's make that. Hello. Yeah, that's fine.
Listen, that doesn't attempt to debate practice. See, that was fair. The beautiful passages on the left and right. That comes to that. So like,
I have been told more information than this. Right, okay, hello everyone, we're going to start. Anyone who turns up after this minute, like the people who are currently about to walk through this door, will just not have to listen to my babble, and that's probably a present for anyone. My name is Hannah, and I'm the president of Liverpool Debating Union. I'm going to go through a couple of things about the debate today, and also just a couple of things about Liverpool Debating Union before I hand you over to our speakers. So firstly, Liverpool Debate, just a bit about Liverpool Debating Union before I do the debate stuff. Liverpool Debating Union is the debate society for all the universities throughout Liverpool. We meet once a week for training and once a month for public debates. You know about public debates because you're here right now. That's good. We also go to competitions every week, pretty much every weekend. So if you are interested in getting involved in competitions, we have a specific competitions officer who is unfortunately not here. But you can, tell me and I will forward it on, or you can email him at competitions@liverpooldebating.co.uk. So, the motion for the debate tonight is that this House would ban animal research, all forms of animal research. The debate tonight is in association with a company called IDEA, the International Debate Education Association, who have kindly provided us with the event. Most debating societies throughout the country are also debating this motion. I know that Kent are debating the motion tonight. I know that UCL did this yesterday. I'm not sure who else is holding theirs tonight, but there's a lot going on, so you're part of a really big project by turning up tonight. So, with that in mind, for the project, I need to take a vote before the debate and a vote after the debate as to whether you agree with the motion. Can I have some paper, Fraser? Right, okay. So, for the motion, this House would ban all forms of animal research. If you agree with that motion, can you please raise your hand? You can abstain as well if you wish. If you disagree with that motion, can you please raise your hand?
It's us.
Can you raise them high?
It's 3 people.
Yeah. Okay, put your hands down. And if you abstain from that vote, can you put your hand up now? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So we're going to see if we can change your mind, or either way, our speakers will anyway. So just a quick format of the debate tonight. There will be 7-minute speeches. Each speaker will deliver it. After the first minute, I will bang. That means that at the end of the text time, and speakers from either side are encouraged to offer points of information to their fellow speakers. May I remind speakers to keep their points of information short, as they are wasting their fellow speakers' time. At the 6th minute, they will hear it back like this. I'll probably clap, to be honest, actually. And that means that the text time has begun again. At 7 minutes, they will shut up. That I'd like to firstly make a point that the speeches, the views given by the speakers today are not necessarily the views that they hold, so please don't try and kill them if they say that they want bunnies to die. I'd just like to say that the proposition this evening have decided to deliver a selected mechanism. So if you feel that they maybe haven't covered the arguments, it's because this side will be given a selected mech, and this side will be working on that mech that they've given. The mechanism is the outline of the debate. So, I think I've said everything. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker this evening, Ben.
I need to stand back here so I can see my head, otherwise it's just a live stream of my torso. Right? Good evening. So, the motion that stands before us today, we're going to argue that animal testing does not have a benefit to science. In fact, it harms science and harms people. Now, you might be asking me why I'm going to do this. Well, we could talk about how much suffering animals have. The problem is it's very emotive, and most people have already made their mind up. Basically, I want drugs to help my gran who's ill, or I don't want people to harm bunny rabbits. Now, there is an academic principle behind arguing this. It's called ethical arithmetic. But I think it's often a very bad debates I've watched, where it comes down to, a bunny rabbit is worth, a millionth of a human, but 1,000 humans are worth a goat. I don't think it's a very good debate. But let's talk about the science, right? This is done, people claim, for science. We don't think that's true. So what's the status quo? I just want to quickly tell you how animal testing works. So if you want to get a drug onto market, you have to test it on 2 live mammals, one that's not a rodent. Basically something better than a rodent. That's the status quo in the UK. Okay, so I'm a physicist, I like numbers, but I'm not going to bombard you with statistics, the other side might. I'm going to give you 2 stats. The FDA, the American body that regulates this, did a study. Said 92% of trials, and I quote, fail because we cannot accurately predict how they will behave in people. So only 8% of the time is there any link between the animal testing and the drug that actually affects humans. And I'd like to point out that the effect might only be marginal, right? It's not a 100% correlation. And also they say that it just doesn't preclude other techniques from doing the same job or doing it better. I'd like to quickly talk about a British Medical Journal study from House about side effects. No, thank you. So, 1 in 16 hospital admissions in the UK are from side effects of drugs, and they've got a 2% fatality rate. So that gives you an idea of how side effects are important. Right. So two things: lack of scientific justification, and the consequences and the harms. So traditionally we've done animal testing, but I don't want to hear any arguments from the other side about tradition, because science breaks traditions, right? If you want to say that, one second please, that the tradition is worth it, you have to prove that the successes of drug trials have been specifically because of the animal testing, and because we proposed an alternative, that other methods couldn't do that as well or better. Yes, sir?
Just on a purely logical and empirical basis, if it doesn't work, why does every single regulator around the world think that it's a good idea?
Because the alternative is, well, at least the historical alternative was more testing on humans, which people are very squeamish of, right? Because there's more danger to humans. So the argument is, which isn't a scientific one, it's a political one. We want to harm animals, not humans. That is not scientific. If science is the best method, the method that works, and animal testing doesn't, you should test on humans. Animal testing doesn't work. You shouldn't do it for political reasons. Why doesn't it work? There's actually no successful model of how toxins or drugs or other such things, how they affect animals and how they affect humans. So there's no successful model. So you test your drugs on your animals. There's no model to predict how often or why they would also have that same effect on humans. Because organisms are very complicated structures, and to model all of these things together in two beings with different DNAs is virtually impossible. It just doesn't work. So if you have no predictive power, you'll have no hypothesis. And hypothesis building is the basis of science. And basically because human animal physiology are very different. So many things affect different animals differently. HIV and AIDS, for example, we believe that this came from a mutated mutated virus from primates. But it only affects humans. It doesn't affect primates, HIV. So you can't test this disease that came from primates on our closest relatives, primates. And I'd just like to say also, if you use this method as opposed to other methods, you block techniques that are justified, right? So new techniques like tissue sampling, like stem cell research, which now I'm going to talk about, and just human testing. And they are justified because they do work, because we've got evidence that they do. I'll see if we've got time. So my second point is about the consequences and the harms to humans and the harms to society that actually doing this gives. Well, first of all, lost time and resources, right? Now this might seem like a silly point. The point is we've only got a finite number of scientists with qualifications. And if they're doing animal testing because they are required to by government, then they can't spend that time and resources on better things, like tissue sampling, like safer human testing, like stem cell research. And it's diverting from the more effective methods. But it also delays drugs and it withholds drugs, right? This takes time, but sometimes when we get this false negative, it withholds a drug that could greatly benefit humankind. Because it doesn't work on an animal, that's got no correlation to what it actually does with humans, 92% of the time. So if you get a drug that makes an animal ill, you say, well, 92% of the time, that has no relation on the human, but we're going to block it anyway. But it gives you false security and it gives you unvigorous testing, right? Thalidomide. Classic example that both sides claim is fair. So thalidomide was tested on animals. First of all, it was tested on animals that see opposite effects with thalidomide than humans do. So first of all, that was basically false security, right? They thought it was fine and mice didn't. They tested on other animals, which does have the same effect. But they didn't test it on pregnant animals, and thalidomide causes birth defects. Now, the point of this is that because it's tradition, because we just do it anyway, we have an undue confidence in it. And basically, we just don't do it vigorously enough, and that was the case. Now we have to test on pregnant animals. But the point is that there's always these things that creep in, because we think our methods are perfect, but they're not. It's a method that doesn't work, and we have a lot of confidence in it, and we just sort of do it randomly. I'm sorry, listen, I was just about to take it. So this is damage to humans, right? Blocks drugs, right? Don't get to humans, don't make them well. It also gives us false confidence in dangerous drugs, right? So we say, well, it was tested on animals, it was tested on apes, and apes are like us. And there's been cases where bad drugs have went to the market and they have harmed people. They have actively harmed people in an unpredictable, uncontrollable way, because we have no idea how they affected animals really as a bearer. But it also has a lack of innovation, right? Use animal research over something else that's more useful. You don't innovate in that area because less effort into it. So to quickly summarise, scientifically, there's no reason why testing an animal should help a human. There's no model between those two things. There is no model. Whereas there are other things that do work, because they're more close to human physiology, which animals aren't. And secondly, there's a lot of harms in it. It harms people because drugs get withdrawn or harmful drugs get on the market. Thank you very much.
I've forgotten it by then already.
I should have said it.
I thank Ben for his speech and invite Fraser to open the case for the opposition bench. Hear, hear.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be doing the opposing side of this debate. I'm going to go on to talk about three main things. The first is the ethical consideration in animal testing. The second are the benefits of animal testing. And the third is why animal testing is uniquely necessary for some research. A couple of points of rebuttal is that we just heard that it stops innovation and that there's this choice between one or the other in terms of animal testing and other things, which we believe is completely inaccurate. As with all scientific testing, you use a multiple of varieties to get the maximum number of results and information you can. Animal testing is not a default option or the only way to do something, but it's another way of doing something that's done in multiple other ways, including all the ways he talked about. So on to my first point. For ethical consideration. So, to test on animals, there are 3 separate licenses which you legally have to get, and they are only granted with substantial evidence. Firstly, you have to show that the research cannot be carried out using a non-animal alternative. So clearly, when we're talking about animal testing being used, this isn't just an off-the-cuff, why the hell not type thing. This is, they are necessary for us to fully understand what it is we're researching. Secondly, you have to prove that the benefits of the research outweigh any possible harms. So again, research into things like the cervical cancer vaccine or the polio vaccine, these are huge life-saving things that have reduced suffering all over the world. This isn't simply a case of just like some small, tiny little thing that rats are being tortured for. And thirdly, they have to meet standards of a detailed ethical review process. That's because ethical review is taken into account and everything is done to ensure that animals do not suffer. This is simply about their need in medical research in order to further everything that's already being done. And as we've heard, there are a huge number of alternatives, including things like 3D imaging models, complex computer programs. However, these are all done as well as and alongside animal testing. You cannot simply decide to do animal testing and think that's okay. You have to have done all of this and proven why animal testing is necessary and looked at the ethical costs of it before you're allowed to get to that stage. So we don't think that taking away another system of, another tool that can be used in life-saving medical research is a necessary reason just because there are other alternatives available because they just do not meet the requirements. Okay, so the benefits of animal testing. We've obviously had a huge number of medical breakthroughs in recent years, and almost all of them have used animal testing. One huge benefit that we haven't yet talked about is that often this research goes towards veterinary science and animal healthcare. This isn't just about benefiting humans at the cost of animals. This is about furthering the health and the lively conditions of everyone. In terms of why we think that it should carry on, an example is that in 1937, a US pharmaceutical company accidentally killed over 100 people. There was a poisonous byproduct found in their solvent, which they were testing on humans. At this time, animal testing wasn't a requirement. Once they looked into it, it was found that it would have been noted if they had done animal testing first. We're talking about, yes, wait. We're talking about a small number of rats in a scientific experiment as opposed to people when we just can't see every possible outcome from a computer screen.
Would it not have also been seen if they'd done more rigorous human testing?
I mean, at the
How do you
time,
prove it's
no.
animal testing only that stopped it?
The point is that animal testing wasn't done and they didn't discover it, so clearly everything else they had done wasn't enough to spot it. When you're talking about people using a computer program to try and find things about medicine when they don't even fully understand that medicine, it's completely illogical to think that everything would be found. You need a living cell in order to fully understand it. So, on to the third point, which is why it is uniquely beneficial in certain cases. So animal testing is unique, and it helps to understand the effects of drugs in a living organism, which is done alongside everything like computer simulations and imaging and all of this stuff. But it provides us with a way to overall reduce suffering, but specifically look at something like genetically modified mice. They were described as being essential in creating the first ever cure for progeria, which is a condition that causes extreme premature aging. And another example, a recent discovery between the overlap of the Alzheimer's gene and the extra chromosome that causes Down syndrome was described as being impossible to have seen in cell growth in a dish because it required them to use two different subspecies of mice and put them together and compare the effects of the medicine on them for that information to become available. It didn't come up in any of the tests that were done before that time. So clearly, it's fairly evident that everything they had done up until then had not been beneficial enough. So just to summarise, we oppose this motion because there are clear benefits to animal testing that have been shown in huge all throughout time, including recently, that provide us with things not available through other methods, and the ethical consideration ensures that we do everything we can to stop suffering. Thank you.
I thank Fraser for his speech, and invite now to continue the case for the proposition bench to him.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Niall. I'll continue the case for the proposition in today's debate. Now, my argument will be structured around two key ideas, right? Now, first of all, I'm going to talk to you about the scientific method advanced by the opposition here, that of testing drugs on animals. I'm going to prove to you that it has failed. So in addition to the harms brought to you by Ben earlier, I'm going to demonstrate to you how it has failed to achieve the desired outcomes. And then I'm going to talk to you about a few of the appropriate and accurate methods of testing drugs with a particular focus on pre-human and human trials. Firstly, a couple of issues of rebuttal. Okay? Now, with regard to the first point brought to you by Fraser, okay, that basically they're trying to put forward this idea that all major drug discoveries over the last century have been as a result of animal testing. Right? And this is false. Okay? The opposition have failed to demonstrate the causal link between testing drugs on animals and then drugs being successful in human beings. It's simply another tick in the box. Okay? And this was raised by the POI Ben. Now, secondly, I'm not going to spend too much time on this ethical consideration matter, okay? I don't want to waste any time here. As much as ethical considerations might play a part in animal testing, they are essentially poisoning and infecting animals. As comfortable as they might be during their lifetime, the animals are dying, okay? I don't want to waste time. So, onto the scientific method, right? Now, the key to understanding this point is to understanding what I mean by the scientific method. So the model that currently exists right now, we identify a need, right? Okay, that's identifying the disease that we're looking to cure. We construct a hypothesis or a theory around this need, and then we test this on animals. We analyse the results, we test it on animals again. We analyse the results, we test it on animals again, until eventually we reach the stage where it's tested on humans. All this does, as Ben has already mentioned, is waste time, gives false results, and as to deal directly with some of the rebuttal there, stops innovation. So we've aimed to demonstrate throughout our speeches that this model fails, right? And the key reason here is because animal studies cannot reliably predict the results in human outcomes. In choosing this method, we're simply holding back results and bringing about the harms brought to you by Ben. There are lots of examples to prove the failure between, the lack of a link between animal and human some things. Penicillin, for example, being toxic to some rodents. Morphine causing hyper-excitement in cats and some species of horse. So obviously these are drugs which are necessary for humans, and penicillin being antibiotic and morphine helping to dull pain. But these are completely different reactions in animals than they do to human beings. And there are lots of other examples, like thalidomide that was discussed before, where drugs pass animal tests and cause death and illness to human beings. Quickly.
So you say that we can't really show that many examples of this actually working. Would it be your stance if we could show you one example of this actually saving human lives, and that would be enough to ban everything, any form of animal testing?
The point being, you haven't failed to show that example. You failed to show the causal link between success of human drugs and animal testings. So, now another very important speech, so it's very important to mention here, right, that health problems, many health problems in human beings that we're at the forefront of trying to cure cannot be replicated in animals. The example has already been brought to you of AIDS, but in addition we have Alzheimer's. Cancer, human cancer cannot accurately be recreated in animals. So what this does, I think, is demonstrate to you that the model fails. We're proposing a new alternative, a new hypothesis. The best alternative is to test on humans. Why is this? It gives a more efficient and more accurate result. So currently the reason this doesn't happen is because the public dislike the idea of testing on humans. Instead, we accept this sort of flawed, erroneous argument that animal testing is somehow beneficial. A very useful parallel to draw here is that of stem cell research. Now, we currently test manufactured artificial cells simply because of these ethical concerns. But realistically, if you were to test on embryonic cells, then the results, scientists estimate we could regrow limbs, we could be curing cancer. So I use that example to demonstrate to you how ethical concerns can actually hinder scientific discovery. Right, and the second point being more accurate and more appropriate methods of testing exist. So it's necessary for us, after what we've just said, to put forward a better alternative to animal testing. So we need to remember throughout this point that human trials are a necessary part of manufacturing new drugs, part of the process under this model or this model. But we argue that there are precursors that exist that can make this process a lot safer, and as a result we get more efficient and more effective results. So, as we've already demonstrated, no successful model exists to demonstrate this causal link, right? DNA tissue, disease, in animals is not the same as that of humans. So a couple of pre-trial alternatives that we're suggesting on this side of the house. We've already discussed computer modelling, right? We can create 3D designs of tissue, of organ samples, of bone marrow, of everything, and we can use these to test drugs and chemicals and the effect that they will have more accurately than we could test in a rodent or a fish or a horse. In addition to this, we also have cellular tests. We can manufacture cells, or we can take these from human beings, again, to gauge human reaction to certain drugs, certain chemicals, and to gauge certain toxicity levels. So even if we were to ignore, right, the massive moral benefits of doing this, in that it's not invasive, in that it doesn't harm any human beings, or doesn't harm any animals, the results themselves are more accurate, and more efficient, and more likely to manufacture more successful drugs. So now we've arrived at the human trial phase, right? Now it's important to highlight, right, with regard to human trials, the people involved in these human trials are getting their agreed and informed consent. They're willing to take the risks involved. So we're advocating in this side of the house microdosing, small doses being given to human beings, which then could be 3D imaged to assess the breakdown in their body. What this does is makes the human trial process a lot safer. So the obvious advantages to human-based live human trials, right? The obvious advantages to science, to scientific breakthroughs being more accurate feedback, right? Human beings can get better feedback than rats or fish can, and a more accurate assessment of the effects on drugs, their benefits and their drawbacks and their risks. What we suggest on this side of the house that will lead to is more effective drugs arriving to the market quicker. More harmful drugs, such as the thalidomide example that was used before, not being widely administered, and more useful drugs not being scrapped at the animal testing phase. And lastly, then, our position being fundamentally that human-based and human trials are the only effective way of solving the problems of animal testing and the most effective way of bringing better drugs to market. Thank you very much.
speech and invite Nissim to continue the case for the opposition to appear here.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get the burden of this debate absolutely straight. In the title, we're talking about all. That means nothing can exist after this. If we say we pass this motion, then we can never do any research ever again on animals. So when Ben and Niall stand up and they go, we failed to show anything that happens, we're rather curious about that firstly, because Ben initially stood up and said it works 8% of the time. So we're not 100% on their sure of their case whether or not they're actually consistent with that. But even if they can show up and they can say that it works for 8% of the time, they need to prove to us why we can never do this again. We believe that they've absolutely failed to show this. We believe in their own case they've actually stood up and they said that it might be worthwhile on their own consideration. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two things to you today. I'm going to talk about, firstly, although they don't want to engage with this, we feel some people in the audience might be up for this. Why is it legitimate to actually do some animal testing on animals with regards to harming animals? I'm secondly going to talk about more on this issue of whether it actually works or not. But before I do that, 3 points of rebuttal. And this goes back, the first one goes back to the 92%. And I have problems with Ben's use of statistics. He goes, 92% of it really isn't accurate, ergo only 8% works. It's not really how statistics works. If 92% of it is sort of not working, that doesn't mean it never works. That probably means a little bit more than 8% works if partially the 92% works. No, thank you. Secondly, this is something Fraser actually told me about. He tells me that they tell you there's no anatomical comparison between mice and humans. There is a rather similar, and there's vets in the audience, so I hesitate there. There is some comparisons between mice and humans that anatomically we can do something, create things. And when people are sort of experts with the knowledge of use of mice, I'm sure that they can pick up and they go, well, that is a sort of a result that isn't actually comparable to human beings because that is a genetic difference between a mouse and a human. Like, these people know enough to be able to make that sort of issue. Thirdly, Niall tells you we've failed to show one problem, we can't do anything, that's why our case fails. Fraser adequately brought up the 1937 example where 100 people died, which we therefore worked out the problem with afterwards by using animals and prevented loss of life in future. So we think on their own case already so far, before I even stand up and speak, we've already proven to you why banning altogether is valid. So why is it legitimate to ban on to test on animals? So I'm going to give you 3 reasons for this very briefly. So firstly, a lot of people say the reason why we shouldn't do things on animals is because there's pain. And when people have pain, it's therefore not okay to do things. So what we think the logical consequence of trying to reduce pain on animals is to have the eagles police. Because eagles harm mice, and therefore eagles don't necessarily only kill when they eat it, they do other things, so therefore we have to have a police to go and harm, to stop excessive use of harm to mice. We don't think that's a metric, we think that's entirely stupid. Secondly, and probably something that more people can probably relate to, is the idea that we do recognise within our system of laws and the people who actually, the electorate which we exist in, that there is a superiority of humans and animals. We look at things like we don't ban the eating of meat. We don't ban the use of leather and materials for like shoes and coats. We don't ban the use of pesticides, which has consistently been proven to kill animals, but purely to make food a little bit better. There's not a system in which we accept, and to be logically consistent over here, if you ban it for principles of harming animals, you have to say we have to ban pesticide. So bear that in mind. The third point I'm going to bring up over here is, I love this point, so this is why I'm going to talk about it. People always say that the only reason why we ban on animals is because we're superior to them. Let's talk about a hypothetical where superior aliens come over and can take us over and then start, and would it be okay for them to go and test on us? And they say, if we can't prove why there's a difference between these scenarios, then we can't test on animals. We say it's a very simple thing. We can do a social contract with aliens, we can communicate with them, because that's how laws work. I don't stab you because I don't want you to stab me. We could communicate that with aliens. However many social contracts I give to the grizzly bear, it's still going to rip my face off. So therefore, we don't have a system where we can actually make that consistent over here. So what we say is that this system of actually having a system of being better with animals is not okay. So therefore, we actually think it's okay in this position to actually go and test on animals. These uses. So we've got PAI insurance. Okay, no, so where does it actually work? So let's move to the second question of does it actually work? And this is going to largely clash with what's come out of Benham. So what are we actually talking about? Let's get started straight. Firstly, we're not talking about cosmetics. Cosmetic testing has been banned since 1998. We're not talking about smoking beagles. Tobacco testing has been banned since 1997. What we're talking about is two types of research. One is like these things like Botox, where we already know the chemical composition of what we know. We know like what we're trying to do is trying to get nerve systems that everybody looks like that, looks ridiculous like Simon Cowell. That's the types of things where we already know the chemical composition of that. The other one which we need to do is with things like when we try and get rid of leukemia, things that we actually don't know the chemical components of that. So we need evidence, we need to create a hypothesis for this, and we need to test it against that. So now says we can do human testing on these situations. The problem is we don't know exactly what's happened. People die at these situations. We point to the North Green Park example, where 6 people did research on that. The 6 people ended up in the ICU, 1 lost the use of their legs, and 3 people died. We talked about the thalidomide disaster, and Ben tries to use this as a prop point, wonderfully, by giving it false hope. No, this is to show that we use a slight problem with the animal testing, so we also tested on pregnant rats in future. That's because of the thalidomide disaster. All that proves is that we can improve it to a situation where we can try and get more information from animals. So what we say is, to actually move this situation forward, we need to do it on living and breathing people. So the question before you is, are medical professionals inherently evil people? We don't think that's true. We think medical professionals are trying to do things that are trying to help people. They say, oh, this is just political pushing on it, and it's going to waste time. No, we say that medical professionals do this because they try and get as many data points as possible. That's how science works. You try and do things simultaneously so you can get the most information as possible. The more data points that we have, because now we can do this on animals as well, it helps us. They talk to 3D computing. Yes, we can use 3D computing as well. We can try and create a better reputation for pharmaceutical companies by also doing that. What they need to prove is that what we've done is when we've helped insulin, when we've used cows, dogs, and rabbits to create a vaccination for cervical cancers, when we've done HIV prevention, when we've used rabbits to cure rabies, when we've used ferrets to try and help canine stamina, these things all done through animal research. When we've done all of that to help everybody, what we say is that this stuff has happened. It's ethically okay, and therefore we're very proud to oppose this motion.
Okay, I thank Nissan for his speech. What we're going to do now is we're going to offer questions to the floor. Please state when you give your question, which side of the debate you are offering the question to. Our speakers will then come up here if they want to speak and answer the question, just so that the live stream can see them. After that, we're then going to, each side is going to give a summary speech with opposition doing their summary speech first. It's going to be about 3 to 5 minutes in length, and then the proposition are going to close the debate. After that, we'll have another vote, and then we'll talk some other stuff. So, does anyone got any questions they would like to offer to either side of our panel? I'll take you at the back. Yeah.
I'm going to sound testing. So, you're saying the use of GM animals in research. Over 50% of animals use gene genetically modified. So you're trying to tell me with 100% confidence that animals used in research, that the research companies don't pick those animals specifically for those genetically modified traits to show the results that they want to show.
What I would say to that is a few things. Firstly, with a system of regulation, what you're trying to say is that they manipulate their research to genetically modified animals, and the data points we get from that research isn't necessarily a good data point to use. 3 responses. Firstly, we have a system of regulation whereby you have an external viewpoint of what's going on, through the FDA in America or whatever regulatory system we have in the UK, I'm sure that's probably touched on the apples not that. But we have these people who can then know what's going on and therefore be able to check our system of regulation and say, if you're manipulating the system, we will come down and be on its own correct. That would do tremendous reputation harm there. Therefore, it's not something that would be in their interest in. Secondly, genetically modified animals are incredibly useful to try and test a different gene, which is more comparable to human beings. Therefore, they can be useful in that sense. And my third response was, I can't remember it right now, but basically, if I think of it, I'll come back to you about it.
You can answer that if you like.
So, yeah, I agree. I think there is a definite chance of confirmation bias because there's this very murky link between what you do in animals and what you do on humans. If you can genetically modify animals, you'll be more predisposed to genetically modify in a way that gives the results that you want. Because basically, it can't be questioned because no one really understands the bit in the middle, right? So I do think it encourages bad science. And, how much is, a human-like cell attached to a rat actually like a human is really a question that no one really knows the answer to.
Third response quickly was, it's obvious that when we use alternative forms like 3D computing that we know already, we come up with future discrepancies between them. It will create a question as to what are these discrepancies. Therefore, if they are manipulating the system to create confirmation bias, that will flag that up already. So we don't think that while it may be an issue in one or two cases, we don't think it's an overall issue. It's a reason bad in itself.
Next. Al?
So the question is almost specifically for Nism. You made an argument based on the fact that humans can enter into social contracts. Could almost exactly the same argument be used to argue for the proposition, because if, from an ethical standpoint, it might be okay to test on people because they can give informed consent, and animals can't give informed consent, so it's exploitation.
Okay, two things. One, that I question how much informed consent can actually be given by humans as much as they don't know the risks they're taking. I point to something written on my paper, North Green Park, where 6 people consented to it. Nobody consents to be killed. If that's a proper risk that may be happening through a system of testing, then you're not obviously giving informed consent to the risk of dying. Because that's not something, like every legal place we've done, like contracts, every contract regulation across the world, across the Western world, said you cannot consent to the risk of dying. That's just coercive consent through the use of like money to incentivize people. So we don't think that's an issue. The second thing is that it wasn't a direct response to that. The response was directly to, is it okay for humans to say we're okay harming animals in general? It's just a general viewpoint. Like, if it wasn't, the question is, is there a distinction between harming humans and harming animals? A lot of people say both life, therefore you can't harm. I'm saying no. The reason why a legal system is created, why it exists, is that I don't stab you, so you don't stab me. When I don't have that relationship anymore, we go back to the sort of basis. That's what I'm saying.
Do you want to come back on that?
Yes, so the consent that humans give is important. Now, first of all, you can consent to doing something that's got a high risk of death, which is what it is. It's not definite death, it's a high risk of death. But parachuting or going to Somalia are two things that have high risk of death. You can sign forms and you can say you want to do it, right? Now, if people, there's clear contracts in saying this is the drug, this is what it's going to do, this is what they expect might happen, this is what they expect you do. Now, people might make that decision and you might say they're foolish, but it's their choice to be foolish for the benefit of mankind, for their own pocket. Whereas humans just, they can't give that consent at all. So, I mean, even if you just do a mild comparative of what Nissan just said, he said, well, animals give no consent and humans give some consent. Now, I like maths, and I know that a number is infinitely bigger than 0, right? 1 is infinitely bigger than 0. There's infinite more consent, right? Now, there might not be perfect consent because nothing's perfect, but there is consent there, where animals absolutely cannot give consent. So if the opposition wishes to talk about ethics, I think it's a very dangerous route to go.
Any more questions? Yeah? No, just tell me what side it's
I was going to ask a question in opposition on the opposition. I think what Hassan said, you've got to remember we create our own moral hazard, and humans are actually animals within the world. So if we didn't actually have the regulations, you've got to think of the world we would live in. You'd have to actually go and hunt in a what we'd call unmoral way. Now, we actually do, in my opinion, we do things better than we would do if we never had the regulations in place. So do you think an animal would think twice about doing something to you? I don't think so.
Well, I mean, the point is that we have these morals, and you're saying that regulations are better than nothing, and we're saying ours is better than regulations. The regulations are better than nothing, I agree, but I'm saying that we should do better than that, right? Like a halfway house is a halfway house. like a regulation that's murder is still murder, right?
Let our speaker
So
answer
the
you,
point is
please.
that the regulation is better than nothing, and we're saying it's bad science, and ethically it's very, very bad, because we have a system of morals about consent that, yeah, animals don't, but we're saying that we have the power that animals don't, so we have to have more morals than they do, because we are in a society. So the regulation is a small amount of good, but nowhere near enough, is what I'd say to that.
I'll take you again at the back. Yeah.
Yeah, so one last thing is probably going to go into another debate as well, ethically. Talk about ethics, if it's correct to do medicine and health with medicine. It's actually ethically correct to cure every single disease in the world. It's my personal debate. But are you actually going to use good long term to go and cure everything? Yes, okay, if my mum had cancer, I would want this drugs to come to there, but being objective now. Is it ethically correct to make the world overpopulate? David Attenborough's mind, you go from 2 billion people to 8 billion people. He's got like 80. Okay, so that's in 60 or 40 years. Is it ethically correct to do everything?
I think that is definitely another debate in itself.
It is.
At least But on the premise of what you just said, you're basically saying that disease is the solution to the population problem. I'd argue there's much better solutions to the population problem.
Can I ask a question back to that?
Yes.
If you say disease is a necessary way of controlling the population, should we abandon, like, the logical, I'm going to take this to an absurd level, just to see your reaction. Would it be true to say that we should just abolish any form of medicine and just let people die off from minor problems?
No, but I think we need to be careful how long we are living. We're an increasingly aging population. We cannot sustain that. We cannot sustain our way on Earth. If we keep eating meat, if we keep processing food and the world how it is, it's just not going to be possible.
So my point would be that within your point isn't that specific results of treatments that come from animal treatments is the problem. It's application and where to apply it.
Yeah.
So if you're happy to put an arbitrary number that everybody should die 73 months, 73 years, 2 months, and 14 days, and 28 minutes, I'm happy to institute that. I don't think that goes to whether or not we should cure stuff when people are 14 years old, because I know some sort of thing we should do through our research. I think there's two distinct types of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Winston, who obviously is famous for IVF, once argued that killing animals, growing and killing animals for human consumption is more ethically wrong and inhumane than using animals for medical testing. What's your response to that?
Two responses. First of all, whether or not killing animals for meat is good or bad, we're arguing whether this is good. If this is bad, we should stop it, right? So you can, if that's the position you take, you say, well, we stop this and we stop meat, but we don't not do this because we're still eating, right? I think they're two separate issues. I'd say that the reason that we eat meat historically is because there was an imperative to make us survive day to day by eating it. In at least parts of the world where there wasn't vegetable resources and a balanced diet. You could maybe make the argument now that it's not the case, but the testing on animals, the ethical point is that it's something that's not immediate. It's not an immediate thing, right? You don't test on animals on a Tuesday and it helps you live through a Wednesday. So I think it's different urgencies. And yeah, but I mean, if meat is bad, we should stop meat and animal testing, not stop animal testing because meat's worse. We should, let's use murder again. We shouldn't not stop burglary because murder's worse.
I'm sorry, I really want to take your question, but we're going to move on to summary speeches now. So yeah, I'm going to put the live stream back, and I'd like to invite.
Is it?
3 to 5. So thank everyone for their questions, and I'd like to invite Ms. Fraser to close the case for the opposition bench. Here.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in summary, we think this comes down to two main points. Firstly, does animal testing work? More specifically, does it work in ways which other testing cannot?
And secondly, do we think this is ethical? On the first, you're being told to believe that animal testing is misleading and extremely unsafe, and that we're just like hurting loads of animals because we can, instead of having a very good reason for it. And there are fallacies. We use alternatives because, as the law demands, it is the only option when it is used. There are multiple examples of alternatives. Magnetic resonance imaging, computer models that we've heard a lot about. It simply is not true if you are being told that an image on a screen is the same as implementing medicine into a living cell. It just cannot be done, and it does not show on a computer screen all of the implications, all of the effects that they may be having, not just the immediate effects, but the longer term effects, the effects if they're mixed with something else. These are things you just can't get until they are tested. And more specifically even than that, as I brought to you earlier, there are specific times when, the example being genetically modified animals, they allow us to isolate specific things like genes, or something like that give us a level of research we would not be able to get through other methods alone, and also ensure that there's no cross-contamination in the results. Recent research in Seattle announced that they used electronic brain implants that enabled a monkey to move its paralysed arm, its paralysed limb. Just made me laugh. But the point being, there are benefits to animals as well as humans when you're talking about animal research. This isn't all about humans, and we have yet to address why it isn't ethical for animals to be a part of testing animal cures. But we also want to talk about what you've heard about how we just do it because people are scared of human testing. I mean, firstly, that's not true because, as the proposition has told you themselves, humans have to be tested in either scenario. The simple fact is, we're talking about testing things on animals to a point where we can ensure they're safe and have some understanding of the effect they're going to have before you're injecting them into humans. But we also don't believe this is true because, to be honest, it's time-consuming, it's extremely costly, and there are huge layers of red tape in order to get animal testing done. So when businesses do decide to do it, it's because it's necessary, because it doesn't really benefit their bottom line. So in closing, I would say that with diseases such as Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis and schizophrenia affecting huge amounts of lives, we need every tool available for us to ensure that we can forward this research and find a cure. Animal testing is one of the many ways that we are able to do that, and it must continue to do so, as there is no relative alternative at the moment. That is why we oppose. Thank you very much.
I thank Fraser for his speech and indeed the opposition bench as a whole, and invite Ben to close the case for the proposition and the debate this evening. Hear him.
Okay, so I could spend a lot of time going into specific examples of how Alzheimer's is a good example, and how you can, the example about genetically modifying animals, you can also do that with tissue samples. But let's talk about the principles. First of all is burden. So, to prove animal testing works, you have to, and to use an example from the past, you have to say that it was the animal testing part that helped ensure it was a good drug. You have to say it was the only method, we're offering alternatives, the only method that could have done this. And why it did it, right? Science is about understanding how and why things happen, not just, well, we did this and something else happened, and in the middle there's this big thing and we're not going to think about it. Right, okay. So there's this point coming out of opposition,
basically says, if we can prove that it ever worked, then we win. Well, first of all, going back to my FDA statistic, the 92% was, they were saying, in 92% of the cases, there is no opposite correlation between the animal test and the human test. It's useless. Well, they're saying it's not that useless. They were saying it's useless. But the thing that we've brought to this debate is some harms of animal testing to humans. And I'm sorry, but I don't think the opposition have really addressed our harms. I'd like to sum this debate up as that harms outweigh accidental and marginal benefits, right? So we have some clear harms, right? Now, this side says there's benefits, but they're quite rare and they're accidental, right? And there's other ways of doing it, right? So should we keep something that accidentally, some of the time, in a way that we don't understand, helps us, when there's clear harms against it and there's alternatives? We don't believe there is. So let's remind you of those harms. Delays in getting drugs to markets, or just never getting to market in the first place. Helping have confidence in bad drugs that then go on to harm people. 1 in 16, sorry, get my numbers right, of all hospitalizations are due to side effects of drugs. 2% of them will fail. It's a big problem. Also, it harms science. It harms the scientific principle, which Nishan brought, and also harms the innovation in these new techniques. When we talked about resources, what we meant is there are not infinite biologists, right? And medical researchers, right? So if you're gonna draw a section of those onto animal research, it draws resources away from other things, right? There's not infinite scientists, especially in the times of quite hard budgets on science. We've heard a lot from the other side about uniqueness. The uniqueness of, I'll just take you in a second, I'll just start with the uniqueness of animal testing. All the uniqueness that animal testing has, human testing has. Many of those uniqueness also artificially made tissues do and stem cells do. But crucially, they don't have the drawbacks that we've brought to the table, right? Which is that the lack of correlation or the anti-correlation between animal and human tests. So animal testing is not really very unique, and in fact, all the good unique things it could bring to the table, other things bring without the drawbacks. Yes, Mr.
So considering, A, we don't know the entire human genome at the moment, so your computers don't work, and B, that we can only use animals as a last resort, how would you address the fact that animals fill up this gap, which is only there because we can't use the things that you want to talk about?
Right, we do know the whole human genome, it's called the Human Genome Project, right? First of all, that's just very bad science. Secondly, so what gap is animal testing filling, right? You're saying in the cases where we can't use computer modelling, in the cases where we can't use these new tissue technologies, all these other things, there's a gap for animal research. I say that gap should be filled with human research. Because it's better, it works much better, it makes sense, we understand it, and also fundamentally, you brought this up and I didn't, the ethics are much better because of concept. So, and I just want to make one more brief point about examples. We've heard a lot of the examples from history, not looking at the context of the resources that Niall brought to the table. These new technologies he talked about weren't available in 1937. So how relevant is an example from 1937? And first of all, and lastly, why do we do animal testing? This side said it's because everyone believes it's right. I don't believe it is, and I believe it's actually litigation, right? The average member of the public, or lawyer like Nissan, believes that animal testing works. If your gran gets it off the drug and they didn't do animal testing, you're going to sue the pants off them. Biologists and people who make drugs are petrified of not doing animal testing so they don't get their arses sued off by people who don't understand why they didn't do animal testing. We ban animal testing, remove that harm altogether. So, why? Why should we ban animal testing? It's bad science. Animal testing works very rarely, we don't understand how it does, and it harms people. It harms with delays to drugs or bad drugs. I beg you to propose it.
Right, okay, we're going to do the vote, and we're going to finish the live stream, and then we're going to talk to you about our events. So, if you agree with the proposition, please, this side, that we ban animal testing, please raise your hand.
Small.
Yeah, if you agree with the opposition, please raise your hand. Oh, I hate counting. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 16, 17, 18. And abstain. 2. Okay, so the results of the vote. Before the debate, 2 people agreed with the proposition and 17 people agreed with the opposition. After the debate, where more people have clearly turned up, because 5 people agree with the proposition and 18 people